She received a letter from someone she had never known. Inside was just a piece of paper with one phrase, "Don't look in the mirror at 3:15. I found it in my mailbox that morning. An envelope with no stamp, no return address. Inside, an old yellowed piece of paper with neat handwriting, "Don't look in the mirror at 3:15. Detective Sarah Mercer had seen her fair share of strange cases in her 15 years with the Boston PD, but nothing quite like this. After her transfer to the quiet suburb of Millfield 6 months ago, she'd expected routine burglaries and speeding tickets. Not anonymous warnings that made her skin crawl. She turned the paper over, examining it under the morning light streaming through her kitchen window. The paper itself seemed old, slightly yellowed at the edges, with a texture that spoke of age. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical in its perfection. Too perfect for a human hand, she thought. Ridiculous, Sarah muttered, crumpling the paper and tossing it into her trash can. But as she prepared for her shift, something nagged at her. Why 3:15 specifically? Why a mirror? Her phone buzzed. It was Captain Reynolds. "Mercer, we've got a situation at 42, Oakwood Drive. Possible BNE, homeowners pretty shaken up." Sarah grabbed her keys. "On my way." 40 minutes later, she stood in Eleanor Whitman's living room. The elderly woman clutched a handkerchief, her hands trembling. "It started with a letter," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 days ago. No stamp, no return address." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What did it say?" "Don't look in the mirror at 3:15. Silly, isn't it? I thought it was kids playing pranks." Sarah tried to maintain her professional composure. "And then what happened?" "Last night, I woke up at 3:14. I don't know why. I've never woken at that time before. I went to the bathroom, and..." Eleanor's voice broke. "I looked in the mirror at exactly 3:15. I know because I checked my watch right before. And Detective Mercer, something wasn't right." "What do you mean?" "My reflection, it smiled at me. But I wasn't smiling." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "Then the lights went out. When they came back on seconds later, my bedroom door was open. I always lock it at night, Detective. Always." Sarah took detailed notes, though part of her wanted to dismiss the woman's account as the product of an overactive imagination, possibly early-onset dementia. But the letter, identical to the one she'd received just hours ago, that couldn't be coincidence. "Mrs. Whitman, do you still have the letter?" "No, I threw it away. Thought it was nonsense." Eleanor dabbed at her eyes. "Now I wish I hadn't." After completing her initial report, Sarah drove to the local library. Its public computers would allow her some anonymity as she searched for similar incidents. 3 hours and numerous cups of mediocre coffee later, she had found 5 similar reports across 3 counties, all within the past month. Each involved an anonymous letter with the same warning, and in each case, the recipient reported strange occurrences at exactly 3:15 a.m., all involving mirrors. Back at the precinct, Sarah approached Officer James Chen, the department's unofficial tech specialist. "Chen, I need a favor." "Off the books." He raised an eyebrow but nodded. "What do you need?" "Information on any similar cases involving anonymous letters warning about mirrors. Specifically mentioning 3:15. That's specific. Should I ask why?" "Probably better if you don't." She hesitated. "And Chen? Don't mention this to Reynolds." "Not yet." That evening, Sarah retrieved the crumpled letter from her trash can, placing it in an evidence bag. Superstition wasn't her style, but professional thoroughness was. She called the lab. "Martinez, I'm sending over a piece of paper. I need fingerprint analysis, paper composition, ink dating, the works. Official case number." "It's Preliminary. Just log it under my badge number for now. She hung up before he could ask more questions. At home, Sarah covered the bathroom mirror with a towel and removed the decorative mirror from her hallway, placing it face down in her closet. Ridiculous precautions, but they made her feel better. Her doorbell rang at 9:30 p.m. Officer Chen stood on her porch, looking uncomfortable. "I found something," he said once inside, opening his laptop on her kitchen table. 7 cases across New England in the past month. All began with the same letter. All recipients reported strange occurrences with mirrors at 3:15 a.m. Any connections between the victims? None I could find. Different ages, occupations, no overlapping social circles. Sarah poured them both coffee. What happened to them? After the mirror incidents? Chen hesitated. That's where it gets weird. 2 were admitted to psychiatric facilities within a week. 1 disappeared, case still open. The others? He trailed off. The others what, Chen? They're fine. Apparently. But there are notes in their files. Officers reported they seemed different. Family members said the same thing. Small behavioral changes. Nothing specific enough to act on, but enough to notice. Sarah's coffee suddenly tasted bitter. So either these people experienced something that drove them to the brink, or something changed them, Chen finished. Either way, not great options. After Chen left, Sarah found herself checking the clock repeatedly. As midnight approached, she decided sleep would be impossible. She made a fresh pot of coffee and spread her notes across the kitchen table. The lab called at 1:23 a.m. "Martinez, it's late. What have you got?" "Nothing. That's why I'm calling." "Literally nothing, detective. No fingerprints, not even yours. The paper is high-quality cotton rag, at least 50 years old based on composition. But the ink is modern. Laser printer, probably printed within the last 48 hours. So someone took antique paper and printed a message on it recently." "Exactly. And detective? The paper has traces of silver nitrate embedded in the fibers." "What does that mean?" "It's used in old photographic processes. And in mirror manufacturing." Sarah thanked him and hung up, the implications swirling in her mind. She doodled idly on her notepad, drawing lines between facts that seemed significant, though she couldn't yet see the pattern. At 3:10 a.m., she felt a strange tension settle over the room. The air seemed heavier, the shadows deeper. Sarah told herself it was sleep deprivation and caffeine, nothing more. 3:14 a.m. Despite her better judgment, Sarah found herself standing in her bathroom doorway. The towel she draped over the mirror hung loosely, one corner slipped down to reveal a sliver of reflective surface. "This is exactly what the letter warned against," she whispered to herself. Yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt, that uniquely human need to confront what frightens us, to peer into the darkness. She reached for the towel. 3:15 a.m. Sarah yanked the towel down. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and tired. Nothing unusual. For 3 seconds. Then her reflection blinked, a split second after she did. A barely perceptible delay, but to Sarah's trained eye, unmistakable. She froze, watching intently. Her reflection mirrored her stillness. Then, slowly, while Sarah's own face remained expressionless with shock, her reflection's lips curved upward into a smile. Sarah stumbled backward, heart pounding in her chest. She hit the light switch, plunging the bathroom into darkness. In the blackness, she heard a whisper. "You looked." Sarah fumbled for the hallway light, breathing hard. When the light came on, she was alone. She spent the remainder of the night in her car, parked under the bright lights of a 24-hour grocery store parking lot. The next morning, functioning on adrenaline and fear-induced clarity, Sarah drove to Eleanor Whitman's house. The woman who answered the door resembled Eleanor, but something was subtly different, her posture more erect, her eyes colder. "Mrs. Whitman. I have a few follow-up questions about your case." "Of course, Detective. Come in." Eleanor's voice had lost its tremor. Inside, Sarah noticed the house had changed. The clutter of a life lived over decades had been organized. Surfaces gleamed. And on every wall hung a mirror, large, ornate pieces that hadn't been there the day before. "You've redecorated," Sarah observed cautiously. "Yes. I've come to appreciate reflections." Eleanor smiled. It was the same smile Sarah had seen on her own reflection. "Would you like some tea, Detective?" "No, thank you." Sarah clutched her notebook tighter. "Mrs. Whitman, have you received any more letters since we spoke?" "No need for letters now." Eleanor's gaze was steady, unblinking. "The message has been received." "And what message is that?" "That boundaries are thinner than we believe. That what we see isn't all that exists." Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "You've seen it too, haven't you, Detective? You looked when you were told not to." Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, though her heart raced. "I'm investigating a potential connection between several similar incidents. I'd like to know if you've noticed any changes in yourself since that night." "Changes?" Eleanor laughed softly. "I see more clearly now. I understand things I didn't before." She leaned forward. "They've always been there, Detective. On the other side of the glass. Watching. Waiting. For millennia, they've tried to cross over. All they needed was for someone to open the door." "Who are they, Mrs. Whitman?" But Eleanor simply smiled that not quite right smile and said, "You'll understand soon. The transition takes time." Back in her car, Sarah called Chen. "I need everything you can find on silver nitrate, mirrors, and the time 3:15. Historical significance, occult references, anything." "That's a tall order, Detective." "Just do it." "And Chen. Cover your mirrors tonight." Over the next 3 days, Sarah interviewed the other letter recipients she could locate. Each showed the same subtle changes in behavior, the same newfound fascination with mirrors. In each home, new mirrors had appeared on the walls. Meanwhile, strange things began happening to Sarah. Her front door, locked and deadbolted at night, would be found slightly ajar in the morning. Objects in her home moved to different positions while she slept. And each day, a new letter would appear in her mailbox. "You did it. Now they know. You opened the door. Don't look out the window." Chen's research provided disturbing context. The time 3:15 appeared in ancient texts as the hour of reflection, when the barrier between worlds was thinnest. Silver nitrate was historically used not just in mirror making but in rituals meant to communicate with entities from the other side. Sarah began sleeping at motels, paying cash, using false names. She covered every reflective surface in each room. Still, she would wake to find the covers on mirrors removed, and a new letter waiting. "You can't hide from your reflection. They're coming through. The door swings both ways." A week after her encounter with the thing in the mirror, Sarah sat in Captain Reynolds' office, explaining her investigation. As she spoke, she noticed his expression shift from concern to skepticism. "Detective Mercer, I'm concerned about the direction of this unsanctioned investigation." He leaned forward. "You're talking about mirror entities and dimensional doorways. This isn't the X-Files." "I know how it sounds, sir. But the evidence. The evidence shows 7 people received prank letters that spooked them. Elderly Mrs. Whitman had a nightmare. And you, Detective, have been working yourself to exhaustion." His tone softened. "You've been through a lot since the Wilson case. Maybe it's time to consider taking that leave the department psychiatrist recommended. Sarah stared at him, then at the small mirror on his office wall. For just a moment, she thought she saw Reynolds' reflection smile while his actual face remained serious. That night, she returned to her apartment to pack essential items. She would drive north, find somewhere remote, somewhere without mirrors or strangers or unexplained letters. But as she entered her bedroom, she froze. Covering every inch of wall space were mirrors, dozens of them, of all shapes and sizes. In each one, she saw herself, but not quite herself. The reflections moved independently, watching her, smiling that wrong smile. On her bed lay a final letter. With trembling hands, she opened it. "Now you're on the other side." Sarah ran to her bathroom and stared into the mirror there. The face that looked back wasn't quite her own anymore. The eyes were different, colder. When she raised her hand to her cheek, she felt it, but the movement in the mirror came a moment later. What if she wasn't looking at a reflection at all? What if the thing on the other side of the glass was now here, and she was there? She pressed her hand against the cool surface of the mirror. It yielded slightly, like the surface of water. She dialed Chen's number with her other hand. When he answered, she spoke quickly. "I need you to come to my apartment. Bring your camera. I need to document what's happening before it's too late." "Sarah? Are you okay? You sound different." She caught her reflection's eye in the mirror. It winked at her. "I'm fine, Chen. Better than ever. But I need to show you something important. Something about reflections." As she hung up, she wondered if Chen would notice the difference when he arrived. Would anyone? How many others had been replaced already, with no one the wiser? Sarah stared at her reflection, and her reflection stared back, both of them smiling now, though for entirely different reasons. The barrier was broken. The door was open. And something fundamental had changed about the world and her place in it. She just wasn't sure which side she was on anymore.